Around the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas can feel a bit like entering a different country, full of unfamiliar concepts, difficult to describe customs, and a vocabulary all its own. Politically, the cryptocurrency investors here lean to the right. They gave a warm welcome to Vice President J.D. Vance, who, before entering politics, worked for a Silicon Valley tech company. He called crypto a symbol of personal liberty.
I'm here today to say loud and clear, with President Trump, crypto finally has a champion and an ally in the White House.
The rise of crypto raises questions about the state of the U.S. dollar. For more than 80 years, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. The value of items traded internationally, from soybeans to diamonds to oil, are all denominated in dollars. And the dollar has always been a safe haven in times of financial panics for both governments and individual investors. But now, the Trump administration's policies have shaken that faith in the dollar like never before. Trump's trade war caused the value of both the dollar and U.S. government bonds to fall. The prospect of burgeoning debt led credit ratings agency Moody's to downgrade the U.S.'s creditworthiness rating.
If the U.S. government, federal government, keeps racking up this high deficit and high debt, at some point, the risk of U.S. dollar defaulting will increase.
Crypto investors see their digital currency as the potential replacement for the dollar over time.
More people today are asking what is money than ever before, and that is largely because of Bitcoin.
Despite the enthusiasm, crypto is still seen as risky, subject to wild peaks and crashes, and not as flexible as traditional currencies, which can be managed by central banks to smooth out instabilities.
Solution is not necessarily to abandon the dollar and invest, your eggs, a lot of your eggs, in crypto assets. So just be very careful.
Mainstream economists are betting that despite the turmoil caused by Trump's policies, the dollar will endure, at least for now. Rob Reynolds, AlJazeera, Las Vegas.
Happy Bitcoin Monday, freaks. It's your host, Odell, here for another Citadel Dispatch, the interactive live show focused on actionable Bitcoin and freedom tech discussion. That intro clip was AlJazeera's coverage of the recent Bitcoin Vegas conference. It felt timely. Before we get started, I wanted to thank all the freaks for continuing to support the show. Dispatch is purely audience funded with Bitcoin donations. We have no ads or sponsors. You can either zap the show in our Nostr live chat, which you can find at citadeldispatch.com/stream, or you can zap the show through podcasting 2.0 apps like Fountain Podcasts. Our top zap from last week's podcasting 2.0 powered zaps was JCB, Ride or Die Freak, sent 20,000 sats. He said, great conversation. Love the backs and forths. If you haven't listened to that one, consider going back and listening. Anyway, freaks, I have a great show lined up today for us. We have Femi here, who's the global Bitcoin development lead for HRF and their Bitcoin development fund. Good friend, first time on the show. How's it going, Femi?
I'm brilliant. Really, really great to be here.
The feeling is mutual. So I thought that intro clip was kind of fun because you guys held your hallmark event at the same time, your annual Oslo Freedom Forum, and you specifically had a Freedom Tech and AI track. that I watched from afar because I could not make it. That seemed was just fantastic. You guys always do a great job with content. So how let's start with that. How did that event go? What were some takeaways? How do you think about it?
It was a brilliant. I mean, it was a Oslo is always a great event. It was my third one, my first one as a member of the team, so it felt different in its own way. But I mean, I think what's beautiful about the Oslo Freedom Forum is the possibility to actually meet people who are using Bitcoin not as an investment asset like we saw in that clip, but as a life or death tool to help them in their fight against some of the worst, hardest, baddest people on the planet. I say Oslo is a gathering of some of the bravest people in the world, because if you're standing up to the might of the Russian government or the Chinese government or the Saudi Arabian government or any other dictator in the world with just your belief and conviction that you're standing for truth, that's brave. Uh, Having one of the speakers at our on the financial freedom stage, the week before, she was abducted, a Ugandan activist. She was abducted by the government of Tanzania while trying to attend the trial of the opposition leader in Tanzania. Abducted, tortured, and dumped on the border of Tanzania and Uganda. And she still made it to Oslo with the bruises on her legs and could still stand on stage and tell her story. Like, that's immense bravery. And in the middle of that, having people working, Bitcoiners, people working on freedom money, working on freedom communication, Nosta, there to engage these people. I think in many ways it puts the work of the builders in context, that you're not just building the technology in the abstract. They're actually people who rely on it for their survival, for the survival of the truth, to be able to actually push back against autocracy that is trying to rise, and being able to interact in that space. Like someone said, it's both depressing and exciting in equal measures. It's depressing when you hear all the horror stories of what's going on in the world. But I think the excitement is seeing that the human spirit is still alive, and that Bitcoin is being actively used as a tool in that fight. It makes the whole work worth it.
Love it. Yeah, so I think I've been volunteering and working alongside Gladstein and his work with the HRF, training activists how to use Bitcoin for almost 7 years now. This week marks the 5-year anniversary of your Bitcoin Development Fund supporting developers working on Bitcoin as freedom money. And, you know, that's always the vibe that I've gotten from HRF events and working with activists. It's twofold, right? It helps combat the burnout because you're like, okay, this is why the work is so important. It's inspiring. I mean, these people are up against odds that I fortunately have never had to go up against in my life. But then also you get hit with this opposite side, which is you just feel like we're not doing enough, we're not doing quick enough, and everyone else is in this little bubble where they think like everything's going great, and there's just so much work to be done. And so I've taken that as a source of inspiration. It's also part of the reason OpenSats exists in the first place was through that work and realizing that so much more needed to be done. I'm curious from your perspective, now that you are a global development lead at HRF, how do you think about it? How do you think about where we are in Bitcoin today, and how we can improve and where the successes are?
So, I mean, I always like to go back to the beginning, and literally the beginning of Bitcoin. I mean, not the prehistory now, but Bitcoin itself started without white paper. a system for peer-to-peer electronic cash. And I think Satoshi, whoever he or they are, were very visionary, but also understanding of the need of a lot of the world. When the intention was, let's create a means for people to move value from one part of the planet to the other part of the planet without going through intermediaries. I think somewhere along the line, while people were trying to get into that system, we realized that alongside the existing fiat system, the fiat system was going to zero against Bitcoin. And of course, the whole interest in Bitcoin as an investment asset then took up on the back of that. But the intention of the original creation wasn't necessarily as a hedge against inflation or a hedge against fiat. It was supposed to be a way for us to actually move value across the world without relying on existing systems. And in the work we do at HRF, we work with people who are desperately in need of a way to move value without relying on the traditional system, because they're people who the traditional system actively considers as enemies. And so while it's easy for a lot of conversation to get and a lot of the hype to be around, or which country now has a Bitcoin reserve, which bank has, which business has Bitcoin on its balance sheet, which ETF is now being launched, how much are people putting in ETFs? While all those conversations are exciting, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that a vast majority of this planet live under authoritarianism. Vast majority of this planet live in places where moving value seamlessly from one place to the other is a nightmare. On the one hand, there's the friction of the system, but on the other, it's the possibility of the system to use your money flows as a weapon against you when you decide to call out authoritarianism. And so the system itself is a cage. The existing financial system, the fiat system, is not just a drain of your value, it's a cage on your freedom. It stops you from being able to demand for rights and justices that people like us living in the West take for granted. And so helping people escape from that system is as much a helping them achieve their human rights as it is helping them escape the devaluation of the fiat system. And being able to enable that work through the work we do at Human Rights Foundation. For us, in many ways, it's us helping ourselves. So we're an organization that helps and works with people defending human rights, fighting for democracy under authoritarian regimes across the world, right? But we know that those people, for them to be able to do their work effectively, the fiat system is being weaponized against them. So us investing in Bitcoin is a way for us to actually enable the people that we exist to support. So it's we're scratching our own itch in many ways. If Bitcoin works, if Bitcoin is able to be used for those values that are important for the activists, for the security, for the decentralization, for the privacy, if that works, it also enables us to be effective in the work we do to help the activists in the first place. And so because of that, it was a no-brainer for us. Well, we got to it, if I'll be fair. We evolved to it. It started with us getting donations in Bitcoin, us seeing the human rights activists we're working with be in situations where Bitcoin was the only lifeline. Early on, I think our earliest interaction with Bitcoin in this regard came with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and seeing how he was debunked, saying that Bitcoin was the only way he could get donation for the works they were doing at WikiLeaks. Fast forward a few years later, HRF received his own donation, I think 2014. So 11 years ago, we received our first Bitcoin donation. And continue to see more of the activists in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, people depending more on the technology for that value as peer-to-peer electronic cash that either allowed aid to go into those countries when the banking system, it was just impossible to use any other means to get value in there, or to get people out when the place was too difficult and they needed to relocate, or whether it is for medical aid, or whether it's for legal aid for people who were confronting dictators. Increasingly, we realized that the technology itself was being a lifeline for us in the work we're doing with the people we're working with. And we realized it made no sense for us not to, or well, we realized that the Bitcoin is not perfect. It needs continuous investment to improve the technology, but also to preserve the values that makes it perfect on censorable money. And so with courtesy of Alex Gladstein, who our chief strategy officer, maybe our chief Bitcoin officer, we decided we need to put our money where our mouth is. And our initial support was to developers in the space, a few Bitcoin core developers, a few application developers. But gradually, I think we realized that what's needed for Bitcoin to be useful and to be usable by activists requires more than just developers. And so over the years, I like to say our fund, the Bitcoin Development Fund, is the innovation Kickstarter in the Bitcoin space. For most people in the Bitcoin space, we are the first ever institutional funder. There are tons of people in the space whose first ever grant came from HRF. Then they got a grant from OpenSats. And that's a trend that we see. We take very risky bets. We take bets on projects at the fringes, where most people in the space, most funders in the space are funding technical projects and developers. We go beyond. Our fund focus is on technical projects that help us preserve the features of Bitcoin we like, that makes it perfect on censorable money. So decentralization, we support projects that decentralize every layer of Bitcoin, decentralizing the mining, decentralizing the development, decentralizing where the developers are from. Projects that help us secure the network, but also enable people to transact with Bitcoin securely. Projects that help us preserve the privacy features of Bitcoin. That helps people be able to engage and interact with it without the chances that their identity can be discovered through chain analysis. We also fund projects that helps us get Bitcoin into the hands of activists and helps them use Bitcoin easily. So we fund user experience projects. We fund translation projects. We fund strategic education projects. We fund application projects that helps us with connecting that last mile of, now I have this Bitcoin, what do I do with it? How do I do my everyday transactions in an environment where there are not many merchants that are already accepting Bitcoin? We fund those kind of projects. But we also realize that the transfer of money is important, but oftentimes what doxes the financial transactions is the communications that happens across, but also the communication platform and infrastructure also has a role in whether the activism happens more effectively or not. And so on the back of that, again, in recognition of the broken decentralized communication system, we also fund a lot of projects around Nostr and centralized communications. Both projects that help us prove the utility of Nostr, but projects that go beyond and make the Nostr protocol more useful and usable by activists. We also now fund beyond Bitcoin, beyond Nostr. We also fund internet freedom projects. because we also realize, as a last resort, when the dictators realize that they can't stop you, then they go after the internet. So we fund projects that help keep the internet on, projects that help with decentralizing the way information is relayed over the internet. So things like Tor. We funded one of our grantees, which they were also at Oslo. They're called Tollgate. They allow anybody become an ISP by selling your excess internet off your router for eCash. You basically just connect the software on your router and you become an ISP, an internet service provider. That for us helps both privacy, but also helps remove the internet service provider, which often is a bottleneck and one of the tools that government uses for surveilling how people interact on the internet. So yeah, where the fund's grown, the fund's evolved. But what's critical is we support Bitcoin, and we support Bitcoin in a way that makes it usable and useful for the activists that we support, because that's the primary objective of the organization. And what's interesting is, even with that mandate, we it's still wide enough and broad enough that we're then able to support very innovative, interesting things that people are building in the space.
Awesome. So I'm pretty sure the first HRF Bitcoin education event, which was held in San Francisco at Block's offices. At that point, it was Square, specifically at Cash App's offices, was January 2019. And I was there with Alex Gladstein, Miles Suter, I think Lop called in, and a few other people. And we had like maybe 12 activists. And I think why do I bring this up? I think it's important context because it's easy to get lost in the minutia and the day to day and be like, we're not doing enough, we're not doing quick enough. But we've come a really, really long way since then. I mean, I remember the tools we were using. Lightning Network was brand new. Most of the wallets people rely on mobile didn't exist yet. We had a lot of trouble with the training. Maybe Cold Card existed, but it was still very, very early. I remember like Ledger gifted a bunch of wallets. The point was it was very much trial by fire. We just kind of did it,
Right.
And saw where the pain points were and where improvements could be made. And since then, we've come a long way, but there's still a lot more work to be done. I see Vitor, who is the lead maintainer of the Amethyst Nostr client, in our live chat, and he's asking you a question that I personally, as one of the leads at OpenSats, don't love the question because it feels like picking your favorite child. So we're not going to ask you to pick your favorite child, but just in your mind, over the last 5 years, or maybe even a subset since you started working with HRF, what do you think is some of the biggest achievements that you guys have found, both through the education, because it's twofold, right? It's you're sending out Bitcoin to all these developers and educators and designers and translators, but then there's also the actual education element, the direct education element with the activists and the training that goes into that. So how do you think about some of the biggest achievements that you guys have made? And then on top of that, I would add, where do you think we could do better? Where can we improve? Where do you want more focus to be?
So it'd be hard for me to isolate and pick one specific grant and say this was our grant. I mean, we funded more than 298 grants in the 5 years.
It's impressive.
Direct through the quarterly grants program, we've given $8.2 million. Right now, we've doubled the numbers every year. Right now, we're giving $1 million every quarter. I also didn't mention we also fund conferences, communities, and gatherings. I'd say what I think has been the success of the fund is there is the amount of human stories and the people in the space and the projects in the space that probably won't have had their start if they didn't get that initial grant to get them off the ground. I was at the African Bitcoin conference in December in Kenya, and I'll talk about the African Bitcoin conference as a success story on its own. But we're in a panel on funding in Bitcoin, and there were 5 of us on the panel. Myself, Abubakar from B Trust, Dred from OpenSat, Mo from Bitcoin Design Foundation, Anita Posh. What was interesting was even though each of us represented different organizations that was giving funding, Anita giving funding to educators, Bitcoin Development Fund giving funding to designers, every single one of us as individuals had been a grantee of HRF at one point or the other. Abubakar for his wallet and for Kala, Dred for Flash, Anita for her work, Bitcoin Design Foundation, me for Kala in the past. That's how pivotal HRFs and the Bitcoin Development Fund has been. I got into the Bitcoin space 3.5 years ago when Kala was being formed, the program to train software engineers from Africa to get them into Bitcoin development. The first grant that Kala got was from the Bitcoin Development Fund. The following year, we had a larger grant from the Bitcoin Development Fund, right? I met Alex Glaston for the first time, which kind of led to me getting into this role at the first African Bitcoin conference in 2023, December. That conference was kickstarted by Farida, a human rights activist. Probably she was at that training that you guys did at Block's office, but human rights activist who first came into this space through a connection with Human Rights Foundation, ended up becoming the convener of the biggest Bitcoin conference in the Global South and the major Bitcoin conference in Africa, right? It was at that conference that I met Miles and Gladstein, and lots of interactions that led to lots even more projects from that space. The Bitcoin Development Fund has funded every major conference in Bitcoin, since the fund was founded. Each one of these an opportunity to find people working on interesting things, but also to connect people together so that they can collaborate, so that new interesting ideas, new interesting projects come out from there. But we get new ideas, new insights of what else is happening around the horizon that we should be funding. So it's hard to isolate one thing. I said the fund's been a catalyst. It's been a Kickstarter for innovation, and the getting the recognition enough from the innovators that we exist and that we're there to enable them, so that makes them apply to us for funding, is the success of the fund. We could be a fund that exists but is not that's struggling for pipeline. We have way more pipeline than we have funding right now, because people recognize that we take bets. We take bets on risky things that move the space forward. And that's the culture that we want to continue. And that's the positioning that we still want to have in the space. There's lots of most of the funders in the space primarily fund developers. We think developers are important for Bitcoin, but we think if Bitcoin is going to be adopted as money, as currency, as peer-to-peer electronic cash, we need more than developers in that conversation. And we're willing to keep betting on more than developers to actually make this more human and more used by humans. So I don't know if that answers Vitor's question.
It's a good answer. It was a great answer. It was a great answer, Femi. So I mean, I feel like we've known each other for quite a bit at this point,
Yeah,
measured in the years. I
yeah.
don't, it all kind of blends together. And I always enjoy having conversations with you because um, we're aligned on 95%, 98%. But we obviously come from two completely different worldviews and perspectives. And you never bite your tongue. I also never bite my tongue. You just say how you think, which I respect and
Bite
appreciate.
short to bite your tongue.
It's a waste. It's a waste of our short lives to self censor yourself. But I remember a presentation you gave maybe a little over a year ago, and it was about the lack of focus on the right things in the space, or at least from your perspective. And I think particularly you had a controversial statement was like, everyone's trying to build wallets. We don't need more wallets. From your position now, where do we need more focus? Like where's the pain points? Where's the points where we can have real tangible improvements in the wider ecosystem? In the short to medium term.
So, so I remember the presentation you referenced, and in that presentation I had a chat, and on that chat, I had at both ends. One end, human beings, all the things that they do to earn their living, which in this case is mostly in fiat. Whether it's a job, whether you're selling stuff, whatever you do, whether it's investment, all the things human beings used to earn is mostly in fiat. And on the other end, the far end, is the things that human beings spend money on to enjoy their lives for quality of life. And again, it's mostly in fiat. And so the assumption is that human beings earn fiat, then we want them to convert that fiat into Bitcoin for storage. But then when they need to live out their lives, they have to convert that Bitcoin back to fiat so that they can pay for school fees, get an Uber, do all the things that they need. And we assume that in that system, Bitcoin is at the center because that's where people are saving. And for me, I think that paradigm actually centralizes fiat. Because for the vast majority of the people on this planet, how do I earn my living? And how do I spend from my living to have a good quality of life? And if they're doing those things predominantly in fiat, then the fiat system stays. And so for me, I think where our paradigm needs to be in this space is how do we eliminate fiat from that picture? And what that means for me is how do we create 1,000,001 ways for people to earn Bitcoin, and which would create 1,000,001 places where people can spend their Bitcoin. And yes, you will save some of your Bitcoin, but people have needs. Money is one commodity, one man-made good that everybody on this planet interacts with every day of their life. From when you wake up in the morning till you go to bed at night, there's several touch points in your day where you have to commerce and trade for things that you can produce that you need for your quality of life. How do we make Bitcoin a critical option at each of those stages? For as long as we treat this thing as digital gold, something you hodl and stack somewhere and don't touch forever, then Bitcoin loses its ability as actual money. And so for me, if I think about where we need to be thinking about directing our energies when it comes to building, it's creating 1,000,001 opportunities for people to earn Bitcoin and 1,000,001 opportunities for people to be able to spend Bitcoin. If I want to learn a new skill and I go on a website that I would usually go to that has maybe 10 million people on it, do I have the option to actually buy a course there and pay in Bitcoin? And if I'm the course creator on that platform, do I have the choice to denominate my course in Bitcoin as well as in fiat? And can I withdraw my earnings on the platform in Bitcoin and or fiat? If I have to go from one place to the other and I have to take an Uber or whatever variation of Uber it is I'm taking to take me from point A to point B, do I have the choice to pay with my Bitcoin wallet? And if I'm the driver, do I have the choice to actually get paid in Bitcoin? My argument is Bitcoin that you earn, you're less worried about volatility of the price of Bitcoin to the US dollars when you earn your Bitcoin versus when you have to purchase it with fiat. Because if you purchase it with fiat, you're thinking about how much was it when I bought it versus how much is it when I have to convert it back to sell. So if we want to remove that volatility curve, which seems to be in many people's mind the barrier for adoption of Bitcoin as currency, then more and more people should be earning Bitcoin. And innovators should be thinking about how do we create ways for more ways for people to earn KYC free Bitcoin through the skills they have, through the things they have, through the services that they can deliver, as opposed to assuming that everybody will convert their fiat to Bitcoin. The problem with the convert fiat to Bitcoin is that the closer you are to the money printer, the more Bitcoin you accumulate. And we're already seeing it right now with companies that are creating fiat US dollar debt and using it to accumulate Bitcoin. And that world basically means that the people who won in the fiat world end up being the winners in the Bitcoin world. And that's not the kind of world I'm interested in. I want everyone to have a fair shot at getting Bitcoin for the things that they can do, for the skills that they have, and let them have access to money that is not being eroded by governments. I think that's where I'd love to see more building.
So I co-sign that perspective, and agree with the hope. I mean, so two things. First of all, my family, we hold our savings all in Bitcoin, like real Bitcoin, self-custody Bitcoin. I earn a mix of Bitcoin and dollars, and when I get dollars, I convert it into Bitcoin, and that's a short gap. The current place we are in the adoption cycle. It is what it is. And we prefer to spend Bitcoin wherever we can spend Bitcoin. I always say that, there's a meme, and every good meme has a basis in reality of we're still early. Bitcoin is still early. And I think the pivotal point where that flips is where most people are earning Bitcoin rather than buying Bitcoin, and most people are spending Bitcoin rather than selling Bitcoin. I think at that point is when Bitcoin is starting to really become the standard, and we're past the quote unquote you are early phase. Now, where I have trouble with is I keep thinking we're like about to hit the precipice where I'm going to be able to spend Bitcoin everywhere, but we just haven't gotten there. I'm curious on your opinion. Like, how do you actually bootstrap that? Like, how do we? I think maybe it happens eventually, probably not with, real work being put in by people, but I think we can accelerate it. I'm just not sure how the best way to accelerate it. Do you have any opinions on how we can accelerate that process to where we get to a point where most things in life I can just spend Bitcoin on?
So I think it's the acceleration, and it's kind of what it also ties to what we do at HRF and the BDF. The acceleration, this is one of those things that will start in the places where the need is acute. I say at the moment, if you wanted to send money to someone in Australia from from somewhere in the US where you are, it's very easy. It's extremely easy. If the person uses, if you wanted to send fiat, if the person uses PayPal or one of the platforms like that, the person sends you a link, you whip out a card, you send it, case closed. There's no part of your thinking where you think about what is the exchange rate between the US dollars and the Australian dollars. If I wanted to do the same thing from Nigeria, it's a nightmare and a half. It's like 6 nightmares in one. because I'm thinking about how do I convert the naira to the US dollars? Where am I going to do the conversion? The banks, if I go to the banks tell me we don't have enough US dollars to convert for you, right? So I go on the streets, and in every African country, you have people on the streets that do the exchange for you, except they're going to give you physical cash. So now I have the physical cash. I need to get to the guy in Australia. Am I going to pop it in the post? Am I going to rely on the banking system? So you already you have places in the world where the need exists and it is real, where getting the bank is not a theoretical event, it's people's everyday reality, where trying to legitimately move value across borders is a nightmare, or where legitimately the government is like my colleague Anna, who used to be CFO, who is the CFO of Anti-Corruption Foundation, woke up one day and the Russian government had gone in their fiat bank account and had put them in the red to the tune of minus $17 billion, right? Or is looking at their bank account to see who is donating to them so that we can declare them enemy of the state, right? For those people, this is not abstract. It is their lived reality. For the human rights defenders that we work with, it's not abstract that the government is surveilling your transactions. And it's and the governments now, with their moves to try and what's the word, institutionalize central bank digital currencies, want to even take this thing to next level on steroids. So if we're looking at how do we bootstrap a system where people are not transacting in fiat, then let's go to the places where transacting in fiat already has so much friction and it's already so dangerous that it becomes a no-brainer that they adopt solutions that enable them transact outside the system. And we've seen that in Nigeria, where I'm from. It's one of the reasons why Nigeria is top 10 in Bitcoin and crypto adoption. People who had legitimate transactions, things they needed to do with money for life and death in some instances, but they just couldn't do it through traditional systems. So when I say builders should stop building wallets and exchanges, which are means to either convert your Bitcoin to fiat or fiat to Bitcoin, or means to store your Bitcoin, it means they need to go to where people are facing real transaction challenges, understand the people, understand the context, and build solutions that build on that to solve the problem. I was in Kenya a couple of months ago. I spent a week in Kenya. I didn't whip out my card once because one of our grantees, Tando, have built an application that basically interfaces Bitcoin with the mobile money system M-Pesa, which means I get in a taxi, I get to the other end of my ride, the taxi driver gives me his mobile number. I go on the Tando app, I type in his mobile number, I type in how much I want to send to him. Instantly, Tando generates a Lightning invoice. I go to my Lightning app of choice, I send an instant payment. The guy gets it in Kenyan shillings in his phone instantly. Right? That's last mile solution. That's it. So that what that means is literally every merchant in Kenya accepts M-Pesa. So you don't have to go to the merchants to convince them to accept Bitcoin. Literally, you can spend your Bitcoin with every merchant in Kenya. Those are the kind of solutions that we need to be building if we want this technology to reach the kind of scale that it needs to. In the intervening, it's going to seamlessly integrate with the fiat system. Since we funded Tando, we've seen similar applications being built in Costa Rica, in Brazil, in Senegal, in Ghana, all across the world. We're now seeing more of those applications and conversations about interfacing those applications across the countries so that we have a whole network of last mile Bitcoin solutions that connect with the existing fiat system, that helps us bring the next 100 million, 500 million, billion people into the ecosystem. Eventually, at some point, they'll turn on the option for the merchants to decide, do I want to actually receive my payments in fiat or do I want to receive it in Bitcoin, right? And that's how we start reaching out to people. But the starting point is we need to move beyond the West. We need to move to the rest of the world. We need to go to the places where people have lots of friction with the financial systems. And we need to go there with the listening ears, with asking ears, with observing, our eyes open to observe, to understand how people are interacting with money now and how can Bitcoin help make their life easier and more seamless. Also, in the last few years, with people like Kala, which is now Bitrust Builders, or Libera de Satoshi in South America, or Vincium in Brazil, Bichala in India, we're starting to Bob Space in Thailand. We're starting to onboard software developers, product builders from the rest of the world into Bitcoin, because a decentralized ecosystem of builders strengthens Bitcoin. When government starts criminalizing writing code and Bitcoin developers in the West become afraid to be identified as Bitcoin developers, we need to be sure that there are people in places across the world that are still contributing to the technology, that are not facing the same risks. As you get more developers from those parts of the world understanding Bitcoin as technology, being able to build on Bitcoin and building Bitcoin, but also being steeped in the nuances of the rest of the world where moving money is still filled with friction, then you're going to be getting more of those people triggering new interesting applications in the Bitcoin space. The challenge we have right now with that group, and that cadre are starting to build, but the challenge they're finding right now is that most of the investors in the space, and I'm mentioning this because I can see 1031 on your head. Most of the investors in the space still come at this from the mindset of the way we know this technology in the West. And they're still finding it, developers, people building products in the global South are still finding it hard to communicate their unique value with investors from the West. And that's putting them in a funding blind spot. So they're too Bitcoiny for the typical crypto investor who want them to do every other coin. They're too crypto-y for traditional fintech VCs who are afraid of anything that touches crypto. And they're not Bitcoin enough, or they're not Western Bitcoin enough for Bitcoin VCs. But we need more funding for those kind of people. There is Jodom, one of our grantees in Kenya, is building BitCircle. In lots of countries in Africa, cooperatives, group savings is a big part of the financial system and experience for people. It has different names in different parts of Africa. In where I'm from, they call it Esusu. In Kenya, they call it Chamas. So in many of these countries, even people who don't have traditional bank accounts are involved in cooperatives. This guy is building on Fedimin protocol. He's building a first Bitcoin native cooperative payment system. And it's not just building that; they're also making the source code open, so that anyone anywhere else in the world where they have a culture of cooperatives can actually build something similar on the Fedimin's protocol. One of our grantees no, not a grantee, but one of my former students at Kala, they're building a platform in Nigeria called MavaPay, which basically I want to send money to my dad. I want to send money to my dad in Nigeria right now. I can't send him Bitcoin. I mean, he's very old. He needs actual fiat. I send Bitcoin to a Lightning address. It appears in his fiat bank account instantly. And they're building APIs for merchants to be able to integrate that into the products that they're building. The applications that are like that are being built that need support. So I'd say Bitcoin VCs also need to expand their mind and realize that if we want this technology to truly scale, we need to start looking at, and maybe even getting LPs or even looking for people on the funds that also are steeped in other realities beyond the West, who can also help with both deal sourcing as well as deal vetting to see and to also understand the context of what's happening in the rest of the world as far as Bitcoin adoption is concerned, because this is critical for scaling technology for sure.
Awesome. I mean, I agree with you there. I mean, just a couple of highlights, things I would pull out is, first of all, I'm aware of Tondo. I haven't used it yet.
We need to get you to Kenya to use it.
Yeah, because I haven't been to Africa yet, and I'm well aware that I owe you a trip. But I have used Bitcoin Jungle in Costa Rica, which has an integration with SimPay, which is their mobile payment system based on phone numbers. And it's a similar situation where you pay with Bitcoin. The recipient just receives it to mobile pay. So basically, every merchant, almost every person in Costa Rica can receive money from you, and you pay with Bitcoin. And the cool aspect there, because Bitcoin's an open protocol and Lightning's an open protocol, is the developers of Tondo don't need to talk to the developers of Bitcoin Jungle. They are cross-compatible just by the mere fact that they both support Bitcoin, which I think is incredibly empowering, that people do not realize. Another piece that I would highlight here, mostly through my work with the Human Rights Foundation, is it's quite refreshing working with people in the developing world, working with activists, because you don't have to explain the need for Bitcoin. Like they understand the need for better money. They understand the need for something that they can spend and save without permission. They just want to know, okay, so how do I use it? Like, what are the tools available to me? How can I make this a reality in my life? While in America, it's very much, even at this point, still, you talk to the average American and you're explaining to them why they would need Bitcoin in the first place. You just skip that whole step when you talk to these people, because they have a real need. Now, I would say on the venture side, I mean, we just, first of all, Bitcoin-focused venture specifically is a drop in the bucket compared to the wider venture ecosystem. Like 1031 is by far the largest, and we've deployed over $150 million into the ecosystem. But there is, if you look at funds like A16Z, Sequoia, like they're raising $1 billion funds on a one-off. So like there's a lot of room to grow there. Obviously, we have a mandate to return value to investors, and with Bitcoin being the opportunity cost, which is like the most difficult opportunity cost in the world to beat. So we have to be very balanced and deliberate about how we deploy funds. We can't be as risky. And we try and find a balance there. Like we have funded BitNob, which is based in Africa. We have funded IBEX, that's based in Latin America. We have given a smaller check to Fedi, and I like to think I was a big part of incubating the Fediman project in general. But then you balance it out with something like Strike, which just has a very obvious business model that just mints cash and makes a lot of money. And you try and find that balance. Now, the beautiful thing about something like OpenSats or the HRF Development Fund is the mandate is freedom. And you're not necessarily trying to make a profit. So I think ideally the world is you have HRF, you have OpenSats, and they're kind of like incubating these ideas and getting them to a non-dilutive point in their business model where then they can start taking actual equity investments. And then the last piece I would add there is there are very few investors that are willing to invest in free and open source projects because they believe that the moat is closed source and proprietary. Right. And I'm very proud that 1031 is unique in that regard, that not only do we invest in open source projects, but we actually advocate we do the opposite of what most investors do. So I try and encourage, sometimes even slightly bully founders into open sourcing their code. Those are
I,
the pieces. Yeah, go on, Femi.
I will say though, so beyond institutional investors, so one of the things I say is it makes no sense to be working on money and to be
Right.
struggling for money,
I know. It's
right?
brutal.
Um, we need more angel investors in Bitcoin. A lot of people's Bitcoin stack, there's certain portions of it that will go a very long way. It may not go a long way in the West, but will go a very long way in Africa, in places in Latin America, and places in Asia, as angel investment for people building interesting solutions that advance Bitcoin and that solve local problems that help to show the utility of Bitcoin. And we need more people in the space, potentially putting some of their stack as angel investment in Bitcoin companies. So rather than give, and it's tough for me to say that working for a charity, but sometimes the way you can actually help projects and help grow the space in the global south is to actually find impact driven businesses in the global south that you can support, and not just support, that you can actually invest in for equity. So you have 100 Bitcoin. 5 Bitcoin is $500,000, just above $500,000, right? That will go a huge way with a lot of the companies that are being built. And I think that's something that people in Bitcoin who are sitting on lots of Bitcoin potentially should be looking at doing. Don't just keep it in cold storage. Let some of it actually be catalysts in helping us grow the space.
That makes sense to me. I mean, it's a weird dynamic. I will say that I've seen a lot of the 1031 investor group is almost all Bitcoiners that want to give back and be part of the community and be more involved with individual founders, and it's this kind of beautiful circular feedback loop, right? Positive feedback loop where you make the Bitcoin ecosystem more robust, so then your remaining Bitcoin is also more valuable and more powerful. But then also at the same time, like, when you can just sit there and hold Bitcoin and get 50% compound annual growth rate, it's really hard to justify taking risky investments. So there's naturally, at least at this point in the adoption cycle, there's naturally a lot of resistance to invest a portion of a Bitcoin stack into Bitcoin. And but I think that will get better over time. Like I think we're in a positive direction there. Also with donating to HRF or OpenSats or stuff, like a lot of Bitcoiners are very gracious.
Absolutely.
And
we really
have a lot of
appreciate
money.
that for sure.
But I do agree. There's a bit of frustration there, and also I would say that, I mean, it's funny too because I think we're aligned on this. You being a major part of the HRF development grant and me with the OpenSats, but we're capitalists. Like I think if you have a profitable business, like that's sustainable, that can scale, that takes it to the next level. And so I would love to see more investment in the space. Like I said, if you look at it globally, it's a drop in the bucket. Femi.
Yes.
I know we have time constraints here. And you highlighted the Bitcoin Africa conference.
Yes.
Farida is one of the most inspirational people I've ever met. So why don't you just talk a little bit about the Africa Bitcoin conference? Why is it important? Why people should consider going? How you think about that?
So my first ever conference in this space was the first ever African Bitcoin conference in Ghana in 2023. We've since then had it once more in Ghana. Last year was in Kenya. This year is happening in Mauritius in the first week of December. Farida is a powerhouse Um, in her late teens, early 20s, she led a protest movement to go after the oldest dictatorship in Africa, which is multi-generational. And even out of in exile, she's still fighting them, but in very with concrete, practical, pragmatic ways. Um, and she organized the first ever African Bitcoin conference, which was the first opportunity that Bitcoiners in Africa actually had to converge, get to know each other, build community, realize the interesting things that were happening across. One of the challenges we have as a continent, unfortunately, because of our history and colonization, Africans hardly convene without an external power bringing them together. The African Bitcoin Conference is a convening for Africans by Africans. It's going strong. It's going stronger than ever. It's evolved to, it's now community owned and community supported. Farida still leads the organizing team, but with lots of input from other parts of the African Bitcoin ecosystem. It's probably the highest signal conference in Bitcoin because we don't have time for number go up conversations. The focus is very practical, how people are using Bitcoin in different countries across Africa, as a hedge against inflation, as a way to solve the problem of the banking, as a way to prevent oneself from censorship and surveillance by, in many cases, terror states, as a way to seamlessly connect with global trade, because Africa is in many ways systematically excluded from global trade. Once you create excessive friction from being able to trade with the rest of the world, the resultant effect is that you won't get enough trade. You won't get enough trade means that you will not generate enough wealth, which means you'd be the continent that everyone is sending aid donations to. That said, even with the aid donations, more money goes to Africa through the diaspora, actually, than VC investments, than international aid combined, right? But that's not part of the popular narrative. What the African Bitcoin Conference is doing is creating a way to actually diffuse interesting ideas across the continent, but also change and challenge the narrative about how Africans are solving Africa's problem using Bitcoin as a tool to do that. HRF has been a sponsor of the conference from the beginning. We are a continued sponsor of the event. It's a big part of our own calendar too, as a team, as a financial freedom team at HRF. Last year, we had 5 members of staff at the conference, probably more than any other conference. Okay, outside the ones that we organize ourselves. The same vein this year, we're also actively involved in there. Again, because a lot of the activists that we support, many of them are in authoritarian regimes in the African continent. And so it's again scratching our own itch. The African Bitcoin ecosystem grows, is strong. It means more solutions locally that the activists that we're supporting in Africa can leverage in their fight for democracy and human rights. And yeah, we're very proud of the conference. It's also been a very big convener, because we're one continent, but we barely meet. Flights are expensive across the continent. There are too many frictions for us to integrate, but that conference enables us to it in the Bitcoin space, and lots of great things have come out of that. And yeah, really excited about it this year. It's in the beautiful island nation of Mauritius. I think it's the 3rd to the 5th, if I'm not wrong, or 2nd to the 5th of December, so very early in December. So anyone who's listening, who's interested, afrobitcoin.org. I believe is the website. We'll be very happy. It's not just for Africans. We welcome people from all across the world that want to be part of the experience.
I love it. Yeah, I really need to make it to that conference. I've
We
only
need to-
heard good things. Femi, this has been a great chat. I will just echo Femi's statement, even as someone who hasn't been to the conference yet, but as someone who has heard much about it and is fortunate enough to be. Once again, I love Farida. Farida's awesome. And I'm fortunate to call a lot of people in the African Bitcoin community friends. People should really consider going if you can make it work. I've heard it's a very special event.
And if you're going,
go on.
anyone who's coming, make sure you take at least a week extra, because
it's a long trip too.
It's a beautiful country. It's a long trip, so you want to see the country.
I think in general, like if you're gonna do conferences, like don't go to every conference.
Yep.
Don't like do the traveling roadshow where you're like the same people are flying from conference to conference the whole year, like away from your family. Do like a good 2 weeks somewhere. Like get to like be with the community, learn with the community, experience the experience, and do it the right way. But Africa particularly, like I didn't really appreciate how far away it was. It's quite far away, and Africa is freaking huge in terms of size. Like people do not appreciate how big of a continent it is. Femi, we're at the end of. I'm very cautious of your time here. I know your time is scarce. And I don't want to take too much more of your time. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. I would love to have you back on more frequently. I think that would be great as new developments happen. But before we wrap here, what are your final thoughts for the listeners?
So on two fronts. So I talked about the Bitcoin Development Fund. We're giving $1 million every quarter to 20 to 25 projects. That either help us advance technically the features of Bitcoin we want, or that help us get Bitcoin in the hands of activists. So I want people to apply. We have a backlog, but I'm constantly looking for what interesting thing are people building in the space. So if you're building a Bitcoin project, an eCash project, a Nostop project, an internet freedom project, or an education project for targeted demographic, or a translation project, a user experience project, please apply. Please apply. I have a brilliant job, which is to give away money. Well, at least money to the right projects. And so yours might be the right project. And then I guess the second thing I'll also say is, if you're sitting on a lot of Bitcoin and you want to support projects in the space, we are a good channel for you to do that. So again, if you go to humanrightshrf.org /donate, I believe, or /devfund, and you find a donation button there. Please feel free to donate some of your Bitcoin to us at the Bitcoin Development Fund. We put it to good use to projects that actually help us advance Bitcoin, advance human rights, and generally advance the world. And we're very, very happy to work with you to do that. Yep, that's it.
Love it. That's hrf.org/devfund. There's buttons there to donate. There's a button there to apply, depending on which side you are. Or you could be the rare unicorn that both donates and applies.
Correct.
I will put those links in the show notes. I will just reiterate that from my experience, your whole team is fantastic, super high integrity individuals. You guys are doing amazing work. It's an honor and a privilege to know you all and work alongside you guys. Freaks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you support the show, thank you for supporting the show. I couldn't do it without you guys, particularly the people who join us for the live chats. I know it's hard to take some time from your busy day to participate, but it is what makes this show unique. And then on Friday, I have Alex Gleason joining us at 1600 UTC. Alex is one of the guys who helped build Truth Social for Trump. And now he's focused on Nostr, Bitcoin, and AI. So that should be a really good conversation. So keep an eye out for that. As always, every link for Dispatch is at citadeldispatch.com. Sharing the show really helps. So share with friends and family. We're on every major platform. Femi, thank you. This was a great conversation. I wish you well. And we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye. Bye, everyone.